Hi guys, so today's video is going to be a list of books that I am surprised don't have higher ratings. Some of these books I really enjoyed, and yeah, I'm like, oh, I feel like more people should like them too. And then other ones are ones that I didn't personally actually enjoy that much, but I still feel like they deserve higher ratings. And that's not to say that you should feel guilty if you didn't like the book, or that you should ever feel like, because in general you have this feeling of like, oh, like I didn't personally like it, but I think it deserves a higher rating, and thus you should feel pressured to rate it higher because of what you think other people will think. I just mean that some of these, while I didn't personally love, I guess I'm kind of surprised that other people also didn't personally love. I definitely have a mix of both books that I really love and I'm like, please be higher, and then books that I'm like, I didn't love you, but also I think you should be higher. And I'm going to start in that camp, and the first one would be The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. This is a story that is heavily inspired by real events in history, and if you are interested in hearing more insight on that, there is a booktuber who has a lot of knowledge about this, Alan from Library of Alexandria, so I'll have his review linked. Either way, I enjoyed R.F. Kuang's writing. I also feel like the representation of this moment in history is done really well and with a lot of care. There's just so many things that I think R.F. Kuang did brilliantly in this story, and I am a very character-driven reader, and I can root for characters that I don't absolutely love, but this character did frustrate me, which is ultimately why I didn't absolutely love it, but I still think it's a fantastic book. I think it deserves the recognition it's getting, and if anything, I think it deserves way more. Next up is a book I did adore, and that would be The Kingdom of Back. Many of you have heard me sing this book's praises throughout this year because it was something I read early on, and I loved it. It follows Nannerl Mozart, who is Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart's sister. She's a real person in history. It is pretty well known that she was just as, if not more, talented than her brother, but because of the restrictions that women had and the lack of freedom they had to pursue their interests, she really didn't get the opportunity to have a career in music despite clearly loving it and having this talent and this skill and this drive. And it is so heartbreaking to see, and what I think was done really well, but it is up completely for interpretation. So if you interpret it differently, I totally understand why the book wouldn't be for you. It is, I think, magical realism portal fantasy. So you have an almost Narnia-esque Kingdom of Back. It's this land that Nannerl and Wolfgang have created to entertain themselves when they are going from one place to the next, which is something that happened in their lives. Their father would constantly make them travel the countryside. It's what caused Mozart to be sick so often, is because he had a weak immune system, and on top of that, he was always traveling, always under these terrible conditions. So in this story, to amuse themselves, they created this make-believe land, and the make-believe land starts out very whimsical, very beautiful, very fairy tale-like. It's got this fae prince, and our main character is very young. And as the story progresses, you see this other land get a lot darker. And I interpreted so much of what was happening to be a reflection on the lack of freedom that this character is seeing as they grow older, this sense of losing hope and of realizing the limitations. That's how I interpreted a lot of what was happening. Of course, I don't think Marie Lu wrote it to be interpreted the same by every single person, but it was so moving to me. It was so powerful to me. And for that reason, I'm really surprised at the lower rating that it has, because I thought it hit on the emotions so hard. But I also kind of understand if it wasn't your thing, really. But still, I think it deserves a higher rating. Next up, we have House of Dragons by Jessica Cluess. This is a story that has 5 point of views. If you don't like multiple point of views, I get why this would not be your thing. But going in, there are 5 different point of views. I do think that the author did a good job of making all of these point of views very distinct, and the setup for the story is that there's this competition that happens whenever the emperor or empress of this land dies, and this competition determines who the next emperor or empress will be. The people that are magically called to compete in this competition have to answer this call, or they and their dragons will die, so them and their dragons are called, and then whoever wins this competition has to kill the other competitors to make sure that there is no threat to the throne. So very cutthroat, and I was expecting this to just be fast-paced action-adventure competition story, but it really takes the time to examine the trauma of a lot of the characters, which I was not expecting, but it still maintained the fun, action-packed elements to it that I expected, and then had these other things I wasn't expecting, and as a result, I just think that I would recommend this to a lot of people. I still think it leans on the fun side, if you will, even though there's the examination of trauma, but I really appreciated that it, while I definitely think there's nothing wrong with a good old time type of book that just is lots of fun, I think this one was lots of fun and hit pretty hard in a few spots. I mean, there was a few times I tabbed that I was like, oh my gosh, that was just so powerful, or that was so moving, oh my goodness, or you really feel for one of the characters and you're like, well, gosh, I don't want everyone else to die, but at this exact moment, I especially don't want you to die. So I think it's such a good time, and I think it deserves a higher rating. I need to not say that at the end of every single book I described, because obviously that's the point of the video. Next up, we have The Queens of Innis Lear. This is by Tessa Gratton. This is the kind of book that I feel like grown-up me would love, and I already love it, but I just feel like the part of you that aspires to be like more mature and more introspective and more empathetic, this book is for that version of yourself, because this is not action-packed. This is not particularly entertaining. This is not a good old time. It's pretty boring. I say that every time I talk about it. This book is boring. However, it is beautifully written, it's beautifully crafted, it's a King Lear retelling. There's so many things to this that are so well done. However, because it is not particularly super interesting, I totally understand why it would get a lower average rating, but I just feel like it deserves to have a higher one because it is so beautifully written, and it's just so good. It's so good. Even though, man, was I dragging my feet when I read this. I get that it's boring. I get that it's hard to get through, but it's also so good. Next up, we have The Thief by Megan Wallen Turner. This is the first book to a fantasy series. It is very short. It is kind of Roman inspired, and we follow a thief who stole something from the king, but through some interesting circumstances is now being kind of employed by this king, not really by his own free will, to try and retrieve something for this said king, and he has to join some of the king's men on this mission, and some of the other people in the group are very pompous and condescending and rude to him. And to be honest, kind of like Queens of Innis Lear, it's a little bit boring. Not a ton happens. They basically just travel from point A to point B. They make camp, and then they're like, this isn't really a good place to camp. We should camp somewhere else. And I'm hungry now. We should get food. And the other character's like, we're not going to stop to get food right now. And they're like, but I'm hungry. That's a lot of the book. So it's weird to recommend because I did think it was fantastic, but I also think it was kind of boring and not a lot happens. But I really enjoyed the main character. I believe they are between the ages of 14 and 16. So they are understandably kind of whiny, but they're very amusing and they're pretty clever. And I just found them as the narrator to be very entertaining. Next up, we have Wicked Fox by Kat Cho, and this is a story that follows a nine-tailed fox. She's half that and half human, and she has to feed off of the energy of people in order to survive. She ends up rescuing a young man, and the next day she goes to her new school, and it turns out he goes to that school, and she was very much intending for nobody to know her secret, but now he knows, and he's just kind of like an average guy. He doesn't really try that hard. He doesn't really want people to have very high expectations of him. It's a dual point of view story, and there's some other stuff going on that is definitely affecting them. The girl, her mom is like a little intense, and the guy has some personal stuff going on that's surprising as far as the amount of time the author took to explore that. There's definitely a lot of abandonment that we really get time to see. And I was very impressed by the amount of time the author took and the amount of care they put into showing something that I think is something a lot of not just young people, even as adults, trying to realize the effects that those feelings of abandonment can have on a person. I just think that the author did such a great job of taking the time to show that. However, as a result, once again, it meant that the book was not the biggest page turner. It wasn't the fastest paced book. And based off the synopsis of this nine-tailed fox, I thought there was going to be more action. I thought there was going to be more of the lore, and there definitely is a lot of Korean folklore in this, which I loved. But I thought there was going to be even more exploration of the mythological type things. I don't know that I was expecting so much of the personal life stuff, but I just think for that one element alone that I kind of feel like it deserves to be, you know, like I've been saying, I think it deserves a higher rating. Definitely let me know some books that you feel this way toward. What are some books that you are just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that more people don't love this, or what's a book that you didn't personally love, but you're surprised other people also didn't personally love. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.